and we'll start the call. Good morning, everybody. This is James Tiwari from Prosoft Technology Group. Welcome to our third webinar, SOA Governance, presented by Samir Issa, our Principal Architect and Delivery Manager for ESB Architectural Services. We have Ram Kanamuri, Vice President for Software AG Practices at Prosoft Group. Without any delay, we'll start the webinar. To those of you who are not aware of Prosoft, I'll just quickly take a couple of minutes to explain who we are. Prosoft is a 20 years old consultancy founded in 1995, headquartered in Downers Grove, Illinois. We have global presence in our offices in the United States, Canada, and India. There are 500 associates globally. The areas of practice include enterprise integration solutions, B2B integration, business process management, analytics, cloud solutions, and managed services. With having industry focus, including retail, financial services, energy, and utilities and manufacturing customers. We partner with technology giants like SAP, Software AG, and IBM. The services we provide are around strategy, architecture, development, project management, business analysis, and testing. We have the engagement models followed. I mean, we provide staff augmentation where we provide with subject matter experts, and strategic outtasking where Prosoft responsible for predefined deliverables, client responsible for overall project delivery, and we undertake project-based engagement models and managed services. Shamil, can you move to the next slide? Yeah, this is some of our technology agnostic core integration services. We provide SOA complete partnership, awareness to realization, SOA governance and center of excellence, ESB reference architecture and strategy, B2B gateways, 24/7 middleware infrastructure support, global delivery model with offshore development, and customer-specific on-site web methods workshops. Without much delay, I'm sorry, we missed the beautiful slide. This is our key differentiation when compared to other software AG partners. We are the oldest partners to web methods. Since 1997, we are associated with web methods. And right now, we are the largest pool of web methods subject matter experts, supporting all the versions. And we provide extensive experience in assessments, enterprise integration, modernizations, upgrades, mentoring, infrastructure services, and support. And we use customer-focused agile global delivery models and value-driven methodologies to provide fixed price on-budget delivery. And we provide web methods 9.x on-demand workshops too. Having said, I'll hand it over to Samir. Samir, can you please take over and explain today's agenda and go over the webinar?
Yeah, thank you, James. Yeah, this is Samir Issa, and I'll be this webinar representative. And I would like to thank everyone for attending this webinar. In this webinar, we will explain, what is SOA governance and why we need governance. Also, we'll go through strategy and roadmap. We'll also explain and look at governance platform and how does CentraSite fit in. We'll also look at how you need to define, elaborate, and implement runtime governance and policy enforcement. And if you have any questions. We'll start with what is governance. Yeah, before we go deeper into understanding SOA governance, let's understand other related architectural definitions. We'll start with software architecture. which is a formal description of a system or detailed plan of a system at the component level to guide its implementation. Another definition to understand what's a service-oriented architecture is basically architectural style that supports service orientation, and it's a subset of principles and methodologies for designing and developing software in form of interoperable services. Another definition that's so important, and it's always tight, this tight relationship between ESB and SOA governance, which is ESB, Enterprise Service Bus. ESB is architecture pattern that helps organizations implement service-oriented integration between software systems. Also, another terminology is Center of Excellence, which refers to an entity that provides leadership, best practices, research, support, training for a focus area. It's also known as Competency Center or Capability Center. Now, what do we need by SOA governance? Governance comes from the root word govern, and governance is the structure of relationship and processes to direct and control the SOA components in order to achieve the enterprise goal by adding value while balancing risk versus return. And in this case, the governance model itself, which has concentration on people, process, and tools. And it always defines what has to be done, how is it done, who has the authority to do it, how is it measured, and all related to people, process, and tool. Now, I'll explain shortly in an example of what and why we need SOA governance. But let's talk about more let you understand a little bit deeper onto what governance means. And most important is to understand the governance itself is a behavior. Right? Governance is a subset of IT governance, which is a subset of enterprise governance. And always it refers to processes and used to govern the adoption and implementation of service-oriented architecture in an enterprise. And SOA governance is about people, processes, and tools. Right? It's not just processes or even tools. It just, as a whole holistic oriented architecture when it comes to, right, people belong to an organization and participants participate in the process around assets using easy and widely adopted tools and techniques. And that's also a very important part of SOA governance, people. And success of SOA governance is dependent on wide acceptance and participations of people in the enterprise. Let's keep it simple, allow the scope and policies evolve over time to gather wider acceptance from various teams, roles, and responsibilities. And in the context of service-oriented architecture, governance is an often misunderstood term. Right? Some people use the term SOA governance to mean service lifecycle governance, which is part of it, but it's not the whole thing. It's basically governing the life cycle of services from creation through deployment. And yeah, let's go through why really we need governance. Now, this is just a higher view of why we need the governance, and we'll explain in details in the next few slides. From high level, why we need governance is to goals. When you have SOA governance, your goals are easily met, right? Such as, when you have interoperability, instead of creating multi codes or double codes or multiple service, when you have governance, you can easily identify and have services and reduce your custom code. Right? Then when you have your goals and interoperability, you can have different common framework like test suites and other things, be able to define it and target your interoperability. And when you have, a governance, it's become easy to transfer knowledge among other team developers. Yeah, also the guiding principles, right? When you work under known behavior, which is governance, it makes it really easy to, adherence to standards. Your assets are visible and discoverable by, by other team members or other, organization members or within the SOA team or other teams. And you will have capability to straightforward way to publish services with known processes and governance, and easy way to find and use services. Yeah, in this example, I'll give you an example of a service and what will happen eventually if you don't have a governance. And let's assume you have an accounting department and you have 2 applications in your department that require currency conversion. And after just reading about web services, you feel like, oh, this would be a great candidate for a web service. So you build your first web service, which is a currency conversion service. Now the good news travel fast, and not to your programs, but also to other co-workers, other departments start hearing about it. They start invoking it. Then before long, the program itself, programs in other departments in your company you even never heard of, start using it. Right then, now and more of other departments even start using it, and it's it got to the point where, oh, okay, a lot of people are using it, or other departments, but it cannot handle the load anymore. Right, and response time now are slow, and some requests even getting dropped. Then what happens? Your manager comes back to you and says, "Oh, okay, the other departments are complaining. Your service is being dropped. Some of the requests, it cannot handle the load. Do something." But the manager isn't happy about spending money from his budget for you, to get other machines, to get more loads, because he's giving free loading services to other departments. Right? Then the same thing, you fix it, but again, more and more departments are using it again, over and over. Yeah, now your manager comes back again and asks you, okay, you need to fix it again, and the cycle continues. Right, now who's responsible? How you can control, if you have services or any assets within an enterprise? And that's what really, we need to implement what's SOA governance, right? It's basically a governance of people, processes, services. Also we need to enforce it. Any governance. We have to implement end-to-end approach of designing, implementation, and enforcement. Now, why really we need governance again? Just as a recap, when your organization starts SOA initiative, and they know the benefit of SOA to build enable applications and solutions that brings eligibility, reuse, and many more benefits. But your journey to SOA maturity, you need to build ESP and modernize your application. And we have previous webinar where we discussed about ESP. Now, this results hundreds of SOA assets, which is services in general. When we services, we don't refer to web services. It could be any assets, access the process models, etc. And we'll talk about assets in the next few slides. Now, these assets will have design time and change time life cycles. Then these assets would be readily discovered in IT SOA projects landscape. Some assets might need runtime governance by policy and SLA enforcement, like the example we mentioned with the accounting department and the currency conversion service. The assets need strict enforcement to comply with standards and patterns established by SOA ESP reference architecture. Yeah, strategy and roadmap. How you can implement a robust and SOA governance approach. First, you need to define the scope, the processes, people, and assets. Right? By establishing an organization responsible for registry, repository ownership, because you have assets, could be different assets, plus process. You need to establish a registry first. That's including you need to establish a center of excellence. You need to define your producer organizations and consumers organization. When you say consumers, who is consuming these assets and how? And the producer, who's providing the services. And also you need to establish approval groups and responsibilities. Those assets are owned by, or even processes and scope, and including people too, are dispersed across the enterprise. And it's hard to manage unless you establish a full workflow, including enterprise architecture approval groups, change management approval group, plus security and operation approval groups. One thing during your roadmap to SOA governance, always you look at SOA governance principles as a core principle you need to adhere to, and that's including you need to conform to organization's governance. If you have already other governance organization one, your governance has to comply to it, and comply to with the enterprise architecture. You need to have a SOA reference architecture defined. You need to identify all the stakeholders. You need to do provider and consumer contracts. You need to know who they are, who's the consumer, who are the providers, and what's the SLAs. Yes, service and SOA solution, metadata management. You need to tailor your SOA governance processes towards your needs. You need to automate your SOA governance processes, as well as you need to establish governance funding model. Eventually, some or many of these has costs behind them, and we need to have a model for funding. Now, these are important SOA principles to apply governance to. This is one of the core ones, the service reuse. You're not going to build services or assets for just once, to be used once only. You have to have in mind when you build them to be reused by all consumers, one or many consumers. Also, service harvesting and life cycle. In addition, you have to have a service governance around service monitoring and policy enforcement and service security. Yeah, one in the approach of how you implement this is you need to define one of the main points here. You need to define your SOA assets types for governance. Now, assets that can be governed can be any type, but you need to define them, define these SOA asset types for governance. It could be business process assets, BPM, PPLs, you name it. It could be virtual service in the clouds or locally, runtime service, URL, could be RESTful, JSON, WSDL. There could be a business service, like business rules or business process or triggering service that initiates a business process. It could be a task, service that aggregates multiple entity service to provide an enterprise business function. It could be an entity service, right, which is service provides operations on a single business entity. And it could be an application service that exposes interfaces, native applications, APIs, web services, could be your own application. And plus there's other many, or it could be other utility service you have in the enterprise, like common services, for specific rules, perform calculations, calendars. Also other things like schemas or data definitions, assets that defines enterprise canonical XML schema, usually associated with other web services assets. Now, when you have all different types of services, tens and tens types of services, you need to establish a governance lifecycle for each asset type. Because some of the assets may change frequently, may not, they may go through different cycles. So they could be classified in one or multiple governance lifecycle. Now, if you have a governance lifecycle, you need to establish a governance review groups, because they have to go through a review. Yeah, and also you need to establish, when you establish a lifecycle, governance lifecycle states, you need to establish states, actions, and policies. Because these assets will go through different states, starting from, go through proposed lifecycle state to planning, design, development, testing, to promotion, then and production, then if we have to retire them or deprecate them. We'll discuss about the lifecycle state, assets lifecycle in the next few slides. Yeah, if you have not defined the consumer who are going to consume your services, you need to define them. Otherwise, you have to know who's going to consume it. And so you can apply SLAs and other restrictions or enforcements on these consumers. Also, you need to define and establish taxonomies, and you need also to have a runtime governance. And we'll talk briefly about runtime governance needs. Yeah, in the previous slide, we talked. We listed. This is the previous slide. We listed the assets life cycle, action and policies, and this is how we in the Prosoft we view when we go through life cycle for assets. It starts with the proposed planning, design, and as part of SOA governance, we have to have a governance review groups. So the first one, governance approvals, design, test, and so on, until it's promoted to production. And this one supports lifecycle models that help to track assets from its conception to retirement. And it supports design, change time policies that can be used to ensure the assets entering the repository confirms the standards, enterprise, and industry best practices. Yeah, this is one of the approaches we follow in here Prosoft with the lifecycle models for different asset types. Now, definitely training is so important when it comes to SOA governance, because we need to train to provide training to all participants to understand the importance of governance and have complete participation. Right, so it's crucial to have complete participations, and it's crucial to train SOA teams, groups, and sub-organization, and they're including business users, analysts, IT project planning, application development teams, ESP, middleware, enterprise, application testing, change control, production management, because all are participants in a way or another. As you know, we talked earlier, the definition of SOA governance it's a behavior more than a tool or technology. Now, how you can achieve such SOA governance? You know, you need to, that's where platforms comes in picture, where you need a governance platform at the minimum is required, and it should be. It should be platform agnostic, must be able to support standard-based services developed using any technologies. Because as we mentioned earlier, there are tens and tens of assets, and you need your tool or your governance platform to support almost every single asset type you can find. Also, the product must have a metadata repository that can store service metadata along with service association to provide impact analysis. Right, this is almost a database or repository to store all assets. Now they are available in that repository for further either analysis or discovery. This product must have its salient features, service discovery. So to allow, you know, different SOA participants or consumers to discover these services. Also, it will allow service versioning in case you have multiple services or changes or services targets for different customers, and also versioning of what has to have policy management, performance tracking, and reporting. As we looked back in the currency conversion with all different issues, you know, the convergent utility encountered, these are a good solution or a good items for a governance platform to be able to help, you know, our guy there who's doing the currency conversion tool. Also, it has to be scalable. It has to have scalable runtime mediation engines. You know, we expect here to have hundreds of thousands of services and be able to scalable enough to, you know, get the runtime information, including the governance of discovery, service versioning, and other things. Now, one of the tools available is called the CentraSite. CentraSite is from Software AG. It's basically as a standards-based SOA registry and repository, rated as best product available in the market by Gartner and Forrester. And there's many other tools too, but this is one of the main one we use here. It serves as the central system of records for the web services and other SOA assets of an organization and provides the tools and infrastructure necessary to implement and manage SOA-based applications successfully. Also, CentraSite supports the entire development lifecycle of an SOA-based application, from its design, implementation, to its deployment and ongoing operation in the runtime environment. Now, this tool And even any SOA governance tool, it must have a change time impact analysis. And another important feature is impact analysis. These options by default is provides graphical representation of dependencies of any service. Great features that come with very handy to identify the impact of any change to a particular service. Now, CentraSite has one of the main feature of that tool, where you can grab any service and do an impact analysis. It tells you who's using it, dependencies, what is dependent, who's dependent on this, or what the service dependent of other services or assets. That way you can, if you go through the change life cycle, you can tell exactly what's the impact across the enterprise or across consumers and providers. So you can manage SLAs, you can enforce things, and you can apply, put this on the track on the service change. Yeah, now where do we start? First, if you go through it towards your SOA's maturity, and you need to define, you need to understand your SOA maturity and define scope of governance. Right? This doesn't come in a day, so you have to do it over a prolonged roadmap in line with your SOA goals. Right? You define your SOA goals, and you define your scope of governance. You identify and carve out SOA governance policies closely aligned with current IT organization roles and responsibilities. Then establish SOA ESP reference architecture and guidelines that form the basis of enforcement. Play out governance life cycles on paper with collaborative workshop of all SOA participating applications and technology groups. And think out of box. Do not try to fit in your existing process into the governance framework. Evaluate the pros and cons while making such attempts. Again, when we talk about SOA governance is a behavior, that's where a lot of times you have to think out of the box and different than as if you have a service or you have an application development and you want to fit a governance on an application rather than a behavior. So you need to define and operate and implement runtime governance and policy enforcement. And we'll show you in here an IT landscape with a SOA and how governance fit within that one. So this model, is useful in specifying the functional component of SOA, right? Including the components that play a role in governance. I'll show you these, which part of an enterprise are the SOA governance component. Now this is basically a high-level view, concepts like redundancy, protocols. I didn't include any of these things. This is more infrastructure. Yeah, and these components are critical for end-to-end runtime SOA governance, and they collaborate together closely in their governance role. Now, now let's talk about what's some core elements that SOA brings together here. Now, in these elements within a SOA implementation, where you need to governance is the ESP, where you have all assets and services, where you have also, besides ESP, you need to have as part of your governance platform service registry and repository, and service manager, where you manage these services, and security always is part of your SOA governance, where you need to, of course, secure and have security part of your SOA. And security depends on how in your implementation. You could be using federated entity manager because you may use assets across different applications or across the enterprise or even the clouds. We're good on time. Okay, and back to this slide. When we have runtime governance, now runtime policies define the sequence of actions a policy enforcement point performs on receipt of requests from a consumer. That's during runtime. The following are some of the actions that can be configured by policies. Authenticate and authorize the service consumer. Validate the incoming request against wisdom. It can alert administrators if the average response falls below a defined threshold value. Enforce security, capture KPIs, value, and enforce SLAs. Also, on runtime governance, it supports exposing native services as virtual services by providing a layer of abstraction between service consumers and providers. And in runtime governance, you need to install and set up a governance tool, an example CentraSite platform. Because basically on runtime you need tools, right? And in this tool, you design deployment architecture for design time, change time, and runtime governance using these tools. You assess capacity and high availability needs, especially runtime governance components. You set up users, groups, roles, permissions for all assets and the governance workflow. Also, you need to implement governance object and automate processes with workflow and policies. You customize assets, catalogs, and versioning. You implement lifecycle models. We talked about this. You need to set up design time and change time policies and enforce them. You need to manage runtime policies and virtual services. You need to have certain custom actions for automations, and you need to have reports and report templates available. And this is one of the features you need to have on runtime governance platform. Yeah, you need to plan and implement, or during your plan and implement phase of SOA governance, you need to establish SOA infrastructure. Now, when you establish SOA infrastructure, it doesn't mean you need to have a new infrastructure. You can use existing one, but you need to look at deployment, your current deployment architecture, your capacity of and availability of design time governance, and capacity planning and scalability design for runtime governance during mediation, and see if your current infrastructure is capable of handling your, if governance can handle and good enough for looking at and governing your SOA. Also, you need to, during your plan and implementation, you need to implement, right? You need to install and you need to have installation configuration, set up user groups and roles, permission, register repository, implement lifecycle models. We talked briefly in previous slides, but plan and implement always is one of the important aspects of SOA governance and should be part of your strategy. Now, this is the example of governance implementations, aspects of implementations, right? And let's look at the first one, service registry and version management. In this one, the mechanism is validate the quality and accuracy of the contents of service registry. Version management is carried out effectively. When you have a strategy, you see what you're trying to achieve in your strategy and if that strategy is being met. So this one considers registered services versus running services. Now, SLA compliance monitoring, this one to enforce the correct execution metrics for every service unification, right? So let's say in the example of the currency conversion, we gave the accounting department the ability to execute it or run it, let's say five times a minute. How to enforcement? Now this is where this comes in picture. And with a certain strategy you need to meet. Dynamic endpoint resolution based on quality of service. Dynamic endpoint resolution based on message, content, and synchronization. And deployment options within your SOA governance implementation. Yeah, you need to validate that services are configured to use the infrastructure most effectively, and you're achieving strategy number 2 and 3. Same thing with security. When you have a governance for security, and you need services correctly implement security decisions for authentication, authorization, or auditing, transport, security, threat protection. And what strategy you need to have in place? Federated entity management with credential propagation, service level management, security gateway. Now, one of the key roles you need to have when you establish SOA governance, you need to have a business executive sponsor, right, and business process owners and service domain owners. You need to have coordinations between the executive, which is basically executive steering committee, architecture review board, business unit committee. You need to have the advice and compliance group. That includes SOA Corporations Board, SOA Center of Excellence. Also, you need to have initial strategy workshops where you need to define organizations, administrations, approvals, assets, the life cycle, registry, consumers, runtime governance, SLAs. And you need to integrate governance framework with your SDLC. Yeah, and don't make governance approval steps as optional. And one of the important artifacts for SOA governance, you need to have SOA governance guide and SOA service and schema design standards handbook available. Now, Prosoft ESP reference architecture and SOA governance approach is proven and refined by multiple successful past implementations. Also, added to the above legacy modernization service to pave the way to highly reactive commerce and mobile process for your success. And thank you for everyone. And I leave this to James.
Thanks, Samir. Thank you so much. I hope the session is informative. Thank you so much, everybody. Now that we are open for questions, there will be a GoToMeeting window to the right-hand side of your desktop. Please place your questions there and we'll address them immediately. So I have one question, Samir, to you. It's what is the best recommendation to set up a CentraSite environment, non-prod versus prod?
No, you need to have, definitely you need to have prod. But for non-prod, the different corporations do it different, but the way we see it is two environments. One is non-prod environment, one production environment. Because, you're not going to have or create life cycles and other things directly in production. You still need lower environments.
Thanks, Samir. Any more questions, please place them in the questions tab. I'll address them immediately. Alternately, I'll be sending a thanks note after this webinar, sending you a link actually to watch the recorded session too. You can place your questions by replying to that email too. We'll address them through replying to the same emails.
I think before we get other questions, this is Ram Kanmuri. I would also like to address that earlier question on a deployment architecture for a governance platform, specifically CentraSite and Mediator combination. A lot of organizations have only 2 installs of the CentraSite. Typically, one CentraSite where is your center of your truth, and another CentraSite maybe as a sandbox for people to just use it for learning and things like that. Because essentially you cannot have 2 different CentraSites and have 2 different registries. It might have some benefits from your deployment architecture, but it would long term it would not play out well in containing the people and process into a single platform. Now, second thing, for the runtime components, for the components like Mediator, where you actually virtualize your services, those will be aligned with your actual environment. So that means you would have mediators in every environment, say production, pre-production, test environment, or even dev. But your CentraSite is only one, and you should be able to virtualize the service onto any target mediator from a single CentraSite platform. So a good analogy would be to treat your CentraSite platform as your source control. Would you have multiple source control repositories? Probably not. So that's how you should treat your governance repository. Thank you.
Thanks, Ram. Thank you so much. Yes, to those of you asking about the copy of the presentation, yes, I will be sharing that for sure. And with this, I think it's already the time. We'll close the webinar. We'll be sending out the next webinar details shortly. I'll publish actually the content and webinars within a couple of days. And I hope to see you, looking forward to see you on our next webinars. Thank you so much for your time. You can always place your additional questions to the thanks note, replying to the thanks note. Thank you so much. This is James Tiwari from Prosoft Technology Group. Thank you everybody for your time today. We'll meet you in the next webinar. Bye-bye.